it's a pleasure to speak to any financial legislation that the government brings forward. And I know there's a lot of debate tonight about, the short title and some words. But the truth is that we're talking about a bill that is going to increase the energy costs for Canadians. And what do I mean? In C-59, the Eiffel restrictions will impose an additional cost on public utilities in this country. And we had witness testimony at the Finance Committee from a public utility in Nova Scotia that said this bill will directly increase the energy costs of ratepayers in Nova Scotia. So I understand that it may be inconvenient for the government or for other parties who support the government, that Conservatives are doing their diligence and taking their time and looking at ways to slow this legislation down because it is increasing the costs of energy on Canadians at a time when they can least afford it. Wisdom has been chasing this government for a long time. It just hasn't caught up with it yet. How is it possible that in an affordability crisis, the government thinks that it makes sense to introduce tax legislation that will directly increase the cost of energy to certain Canadians in this country, in particular Nova Scotia, at a time when Canadians are facing an affordability crisis? The government's stated policy objective is to make energy more expensive. We are the only country on the planet who has increased the cost of energy through direct carbon tax increases and now also through an indirect increase through increasing or imposing additional taxes on public utilities, which is commonly referred to as the Eiffel restrictions. So, Madam Chair, it's with great pleasure that I speak on this bill tonight, especially on the short title. I think we could think of many better titles for this bill, including "The Government of Canada wants you to pay more." The Government of Canada doesn't think you pay enough for energy. The Government of Canada is just out of ideas. Those would be far better titles for the bill, Mr. Speaker. It's great to see you in the chair this evening. We'll be speaking later on a point of privilege, I suspect. There was some competition provisions in this bill, which also raised some concern. Now, the government has made very significant and substantive changes to competition policy in the last 3 budget bills. Each time, interestingly enough, the government says, these provisions are the provisions that are monumental, never seen before have we made these great changes to the competition policy, only to a few months later bring in some more changes. Now, I say that because they've had lots of time to think about what they would do with competition policy. Well, the government proposed a number of substantive changes, and I have to give my NDP colleague, who is now the new member of the Finance Committee, credit. He sliced up and diced up this government's competition provisions in this bill like never before. In fact, it is actually embarrassing. The government should be embarrassed that the competition provisions that it put forward in C-59 were completely redrafted by its coalition partner. The government's had multiple months and years to think about the provisions it wants to change. When it finally says, we have the best changes, they get absolutely railroaded by their supply and confidence partner. That, Mr. Speaker, should be embarrassing for the government. That is why we're here debating this bill. That's why we're here debating the title. If you want another title for the bill, as I said, this is the government, we're out of ideas. How about, we think you can pay just a little more? That's what the bill should be called, because energy bills are going up for people in Nova Scotia as for this bill. In addition, the number of drafting errors in this bill, Mr. Chair, are significant. There was a provision called dividend reduction rules. As soon as the budget bill was tabled, some smart individuals said, geez, I don't think the government understands how this is going to affect individual life insurance policyholders. Maybe somebody should call them and give them a lesson. It took 8 months for them actually to explain how a particular life insurance product worked, participating whole life insurance. Now, they eventually brought in a significant amendment to fix it. That's why this bill was delayed. This bill was delayed because all of the drafting errors in the bill, and they didn't even understand how these significant changes would affect the cost to Canadians. These are the reasons for which we are trying to delay the bill. The government doesn't even have a sweet clue about what some of these amendments do. And now they say, oh, we have to pass the bill because the investment tax credits. The market's asking for them. Well, guess what? We can pass the bill tonight if the government wants, and no one can use the investment tax credits because the CRA and Natural Resources Canada still haven't put out the required guidance that will be required for companies to take advantage of the investment tax credits. If the government was so serious about getting this bill passed, they would have all of their homework done. And they don't. Maybe the dog ate it. I don't know what the excuse is, but this government is not ready. They're out of ideas. It was them who chose to delay this bill to now. It was them who had all the drafting errors in the bill. It is them who's decided to make energy more expensive in this bill. They tried to make, indirectly, life insurance products more expensive in this bill, but realized 5 million Canadians would have to pay more for their life insurance product because they were trying to find revenue somewhere and tax the big banks more and tax financial institutions more, not realizing that those costs for that product are passed directly to consumers. So I'm very, very pleased to speak against the short title of this bill if it means that we can keep energy costs lower for some Canadians just a little bit longer.